Report published by the American Medical Association, the AMA, finds that neither adult use marijuana legalization nor the opening of retail stores in the U.S. States have led to increases in youth cannabis use. Rather, the reforms were generally associated with more young people reporting not using marijuana, along with increases in those who say they don't use alcohol or vape products either. The results of the study published on Monday in the medical group's journal, the JAMA Pediatrics, reinforced previous findings that legalizing and regulating marijuana for adults typically does not increase youth use of the substance, contrary to what opponents of the policy change often argue. The study drew data from in 47 states, looking at responses from 898,271 teens. In quotes, with parent consent, authors explained students from the 9th to the 12th grade self-reported prior month use of cannabis, alcohol, cigarettes, and e-cigarettes. Passage of recreational cannabis laws, better known as RCLs, was not associated with adolescents' likelihood or frequency of cannabis use, the analysis found, and although negative total effect estimates indicated significantly lowered use following RCL, nor were increases associated with the launch of adult use sales, better known as RCRs. The study was authored by a 5-person team from Boston College and the University of Maryland at College Park, and to their knowledge, they wrote, "This study is the first to evaluate associations between RCL and RCR policies and adolescent substance use through 2021. Results the study concludes suggest that legalization and greater control over cannabis markets have not facilitated adolescents' entry into substance use, and over time, it seems adult use marijuana laws led to lower odds of any cannabinoid use. Each additional year of RCL, the study says, was associated with an 8% higher odds of zero cannabis use, lower likelihood of any use with non-significant total estimates, they say. The opening of retail markets, meanwhile, was associated with a 28% higher odds of zero cannabis use, with each additional year of the RCR exposure associated with 8% higher odds of zero cannabis use. Considering other substances, RCL showed a negative total effect estimate for alcohol use. The study continues, while no significant results emerged for cigarettes. As for vaping, it continues. Each additional year, adult use marijuana legalization laws being in place was associated with a 16% increased odds of zero e-cigarette use, with a negative total effect estimate, and a regulated retail cannabis market, meanwhile, was associated with 42% increased odds of zero e-cigarette use, with each additional year of RCR associated with 20% increased odds of zero use, both showing significant negative total effect estimates. From a youth health perspective, not all of the study's findings are positive. One outcome associated with the launch of retail stores was that youth who already used marijuana did so more frequently after the market opened, and specifically, the change was associated with a 26% higher frequency of use among users, combining to a non-significant total effect estimate. When considered along with the increased likelihood of zero cannabis use, each additional year of retail markets being open was associated with a 8% higher frequency use, with non-significant total effect estimate. Using the most recently available 2011 through 2021 data, we found limited associations between RCL and RCR with adolescent substance use, extending previous findings. The report says RCL was associated with modest decreases in cannabis, alcohol, and e-cigarette use, and RCR was associated with lower e-cigarette use and lower likelihood, but also increased frequency of cannabis use among users, leading to no overall change in cannabis use. The team's report concludes that given the negative health consequences associated with early and heavy use of the substances, and results suggesting users of cannabis may be increasing their frequency of use response to retail availability, greater attention is warranted to to sources and trajectories among frequent youth users of cannabis. The subject of the youth has been a contentious topic as more states consider legalizing marijuana, with opponents and supporters of the reform often disagreeing on how to interpret results of various studies, especially in light of sometimes mixed results in the latest JAMA paper and others. Recently released data from a Washington state survey of adolescent and teen students found overall declines in both lifetime and past 30-day marijuana use since legalization, with striking drops in recent years that held steady through 2023. And the results also indicate that perceived ease of access to cannabis among underage students has generally fallen since the state enacted legalization for adults in 2012. A separate study late last year also found that Canadian high school students reported it was difficult to access marijuana since the government legalized the drug nationwide in 2019, and the prevalence of the current cannabis use also fell during the study period from 12.7% in 2018-2019 to 7.5% in 2020-21, even as retail sales of marijuana expanded across the country. And in December, meanwhile, a U.S. health official said that teen marijuana use has increased even as state legalization has proliferated across the country, and in quotes, "there has been no substantial increases at all," said Marcia Lopez, chief of the National Institute of Drug Abuse NIDA's epidemiological research branch. She says, in fact, they have not reported an increase in perceived availability either, which is kind of interesting. Another earlier analysis from the CDC found that rates of current and lifetime cannabis use among high school students have continued to drop amid the legalization movement, and a study of high school students in Massachusetts was published last November found that youth in the state were no more likely to use marijuana after legalization, though more students perceived their parents as cannabis consumers after the policy change. And finally, a separate NIDA-funded study published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine in 2022 also found that state-level cannabis legalization was not associated with increased youth use, and the study demonstrated that youth who spent more of their adolescence under legalization with no more or less likely to have used cannabis at the age of 15 years than adolescents who spent little or no time under legalization. Yet another 2022 study from Michigan State University researchers published in the journal PLOS One found that the cannabis retail sales might be followed by the increased occurrence of cannabis onsets for older adults in legal states, but not for underage persons who currently cannot buy cannabis products in a retail outlet. The trends were observed despite adult use marijuana and certain psychedelics reaching historic heights in 2022, according to separate data released last year. Well, Yarrow, I know you love some good data, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this, because I think this is some good news overall.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been biting my tongue waiting for you to go through that alphabet soup of statistics.
Sorry
and for any of our visual or kinesthetic learners, I invite you to go read the article, because trying to track all those statistics through Jason's covering of the article or reading of the article isn't going to be the best way for you to actually absorb that information. I actually almost wanted to put the link to the article in the YouTube chat just so that people had quick reference. But luckily, High at 9 News, the website, will have that information, yada, yada, yada. Here's what's really painful for me. The article that I covered today around tax policy fails to acknowledge the data in this article, which is that adult use markets and the reduction to teenage cannabis use as a result is actually a public health benefit. And so when they sit there and they have cannabis be a part of these sin taxes, but they're not taking into account the data here, which is coming from very mainstream, nonpartisan sources, National Institute of Health, National Institute of Addiction and Disease. I mean, these are not necessarily organizations that have a particular ideological agenda. And what they're saying is, when something becomes accessible and not illicit, not cool, and not revolutionary, and not a rebellious act, us adults have taken the cool out of it for kids. I think the use of cannabis by developing minds is a harm that, for the most part, the industry understates. And I think that this article shows that by making cannabis safe, accessible, affordable, and normalizing it, we actually help to solve that issue. And so, I think of the cornhole guy who doesn't want to see any more retail in New York. Well, obviously you don't care about young kids then. And I think about that the tax economist who wrote that article who talked about sin taxes and the impact on youth. Well, obviously you don't care about kids, because if you're not pro retail, if you're not pro proliferation of cannabis accessibility, then you're actually flying in the face of this public health data that's being articulated in the article you just covered.
Yep. I agree with that. I agree with all of that, Yarrow. And at the end of the day, I really just wanted to end on some good news, because I think overall this is fantastic news. And just what I really want to know too is I want to know what Project Sam has to say, what their rebuttal would be in regards with all these studies.
They don't have one. They don't, because data and facts and studies that don't support a bias tend to create a stammering seal situation. Because what are they going to say? I mean, this is showing that when we make this normalized, the risks go down to the most important constituents.
Agreed. It takes the cool out of it. And it takes the whole breaking the law. And
I really, did you just quote Judas Priest? I love it. So that was a good song. Yeah. What I really liked is that the study didn't just poll these kids for cannabis, but also tobacco, also e-cigarettes, a variety of age-restricted products that these kids are getting their hands on. And I thought that was a broader, more comprehensive approach to creating this information.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I wasn't surprised at the part of when they said that the kids that did use cannabis that their use went up, because in essence you have more availability, and so I wasn't too surprised by that, but I was really glad to see that overall that the use in youth was down, and they weren't like, oh yeah, like they weren't basically doing what the Reefer Madness critics all say that is going to happen. And so
flies in the face of every NIMBY who doesn't want to see retail in their town. Exactly. This just flies right in the face of that.
I agree with you 100% on that, Yarrow.